The first time my boss called me replaceable, I smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because I had already decided that if Daniel Mercer wanted to find out exactly how replaceable I was going to let him. My name is Emily Carter, and for 6 years, I had worked at Mercer & Cole, a Chicago-based consulting firm that specialized in helping mid-sized companies survive messy transitions. I wasn't the loudest person in the office. I wasn't the executive with the corner office or the expensive watch. I was the person people called when something was about to go wrong. A client missed a deadline? I fixed it. A contract had conflicting numbers? I found the mistake. A furious executive called at 6:30 on a Friday evening? I picked up. And there was one client in particular who had become the backbone of our company. Redwood Medical Systems. They were responsible for nearly a third of our annual revenue. Their CEO, Michael Bennett, trusted very few people inside Mercer & Cole. For some reason, I was one of them. Emily, Michael once told me during a conference call, when you tell me something is handled, I stop worrying. That sentence meant more to me than any promotion ever had. Unfortunately, my boss never seemed to hear it. Daniel Mercer was the kind of executive who remembered who brought him coffee, but forgot who saved his company from disaster. He wasn't openly cruel. That would have been easier. Instead, he was polished. Friendly when people were watching. Cold when they weren't. And he had a particular habit of taking credit for work other people had done. I learned to live with it. Until the quarterly executive meeting in March. I had spent 3 weeks preparing a recovery plan for Redwood Medical after one of their largest suppliers unexpectedly canceled a major contract. The plan was complicated. It involved restructuring delivery schedules, renegotiating vendor terms, and redesigning part of Redwood's internal workflow. If we got it wrong, Redwood could lose millions. If we got it right, Mercer & Cole would likely receive a major 5-year extension. I walked into the conference room carrying a 37-page presentation. Daniel was already there. So was our operations director, Karen Blake, and 2 senior consultants. Daniel glanced at the presentation. You prepared all this? Yes. He smiled. Let's hope it isn't as complicated as you make everything. I ignored the comment. For nearly 40 minutes, I explained the strategy. Everyone listened. Even Daniel. When I finished, Karen nodded slowly. This could actually work. I felt a small wave of relief. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair. I'll present it to Redwood. I blinked. Excuse me. I'll present it. But I've been working directly with Michael Bennett on this. Daniel's smile disappeared. And you're an employee, Emily, not an executive. The room went quiet. I looked at the others. Nobody spoke. Daniel continued. You're very good at your job. But let's be realistic. People like you are replaceable. The words landed harder than I expected. I stared at him. People like me? He shrugged. People who execute. People who support. People who make executives look good. My face felt hot. You mean people who do the actual work? Karen looked down at the table. Daniel's jaw tightened. Careful. I wanted to argue. Instead, I closed my laptop. Understood. I walked out. I expected to cry in the bathroom. I didn't. I went back to my desk and opened the Redwood account. For the first time in 6 years, I looked at my work differently. Not emotionally. Practically. Every major client communication I'd handled was documented. Every strategy I developed was time-stamped. Every emergency I'd solved was recorded in project management reports. And then I noticed something. Michael Bennett had never once asked Daniel for help. He always asked for me. That realization changed something inside me. 2 days later, Daniel called me into his office. Redwood liked the proposal, he said. I nodded. Good. They want the implementation team changed. My stomach tightened. Changed how? You won't be leading it. I stared at him. Who will? Jason. Jason Reed had joined the company 8 months earlier. He was smart, confident, and Daniel's favorite. He was also the kind of person who thought asking for a spreadsheet was the same thing as understanding the business behind it. Jason doesn't know Redwood's systems. He'll learn. Michael specifically requested that I remain involved. Daniel leaned forward. Michael doesn't make staffing decisions. That was when I understood. This wasn't about Jason. It was about control. Daniel didn't want Michael trusting someone he couldn't control. And apparently, that someone was me. I left his office without arguing. That evening, I received an email from Michael. Emily, can we talk privately tomorrow morning? I replied immediately. Of course. The next morning, I arrived at a coffee shop near Redwood's Chicago office. Michael was already sitting in the corner. He looked exhausted. Emily, he said. What happened? I hesitated. Why? Because Daniel told me you're being removed from our account. I looked down at my coffee. That's true. Michael leaned closer. Did you ask to leave? No. He was silent for a moment. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. Then I have a problem. What kind of problem? Your company thinks I'm hiring Mercer and Cole. I frowned. You are. No. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. Inside was a draft proposal from another consulting firm. Michael pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. We're considering moving our entire consulting contract. My heart started pounding. Because of me? Not exactly. He looked directly at me. Because of what your boss did. I couldn't speak. Michael continued. Emily, I've worked with your company for 5 years. I've tolerated missed calls, inflated invoices, and Daniel taking credit for things your team accomplished. His expression hardened. But I will not tolerate losing the one person who understands our business. I stared at the folder. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you aren't on the account, Redwood may walk. My hands went cold. Then Michael added quietly. And there's something else you need to know. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second document. This came from your company yesterday. I looked at the page. It was an internal staffing proposal. My name appeared near the bottom. Next to it were the words, position eliminated after transition. I read it twice. Then a third time. Daniel hadn't simply called me replaceable. He had already planned to replace me. I looked up at Michael. Did Daniel send this to you? No. Then how did you get it? Michael's expression changed. I have a source inside Mercer and Cole. My heart stopped. Who? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he closed the folder and said, someone who thinks you need to know what your boss is really planning. I stared at him. For 6 years, I had believed my biggest problem was an arrogant boss. I was beginning to realize Daniel wasn't just trying to push me out. He was trying to erase the evidence that I had become indispensable. And the person who had secretly warned Michael was someone I had trusted every single day. Michael finally whispered the name. I froze. Because it was the last person I ever expected. Michael's words stayed suspended between us. The person who sent me the document was Karen Blake. I stared at him. Karen, our operations director. The woman who had worked beside Daniel for almost 15 years. The woman who had sat across the conference table when Daniel called me replaceable. The woman who had looked down at the table instead of defending me. For a moment, I couldn't decide what hurt more. That Karen had betrayed Daniel. Or that she had apparently been keeping secrets from me, too. Why would she do that? I asked. Michael shook his head. I don't know. But she told me something else. What? Daniel has been preparing to restructure the Redwood account for months. I felt my stomach tighten. Months? Yes. Michael opened the folder again. There were spreadsheets, internal emails, staffing projections, and meeting notes. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw my name. Daniel had described me as a single-point dependency. In other words, he believed Redwood relied too heavily on me. But underneath that statement was something much more disturbing. He had proposed moving key responsibilities away from me and assigning them to Jason. Not because Jason was more qualified. Because Daniel wanted to make sure no employee became more important to the company than management. I looked at Michael. He was deliberately making me less valuable. Exactly. I sat back. Suddenly, months of strange behavior made sense. Daniel had started excluding me from certain meetings. He had asked Jason to shadow my calls. He had stopped forwarding some client emails. And twice, I'd found myself being blamed for delays I hadn't even been informed about. It hadn't been random. It had been preparation. Preparation for removing me. Michael leaned forward. What are you going to do? I looked at the documents. For the first time since Daniel insulted me, I didn't feel angry. I felt calm. I think I'm going to let him. Michael raised an eyebrow. Let him. Let him replace me. I closed the folder. But I'm not going to help him do it. The next morning, I returned to Mercer and Cole as if nothing had happened. Daniel called me into his office before 9. Good news, he said. I waited. Jason will take over most of the Redwood account starting Monday. I nodded. Okay. He looked surprised. No argument? No. You're taking this better than I expected. I gave him a small smile. People adapt. He smiled back. That's the attitude. What Daniel didn't know was that I had started documenting everything. Not secretly stealing company information. Not sabotaging anything. I simply made sure every legitimate piece of work I had completed was properly archived according to company policy. Client approvals. Project histories. Implementation notes. Performance reports. Email records. Every decision I had made was already in the company's systems. And I began writing detailed transition notes for Jason. I wasn't going to sabotage him. I wasn't going to make his job impossible. I was going to give him exactly what Daniel claimed he wanted. A clean transition. On Friday afternoon, Jason came to my desk. Emily, can we talk? Sure. He looked uncomfortable. I don't understand half of the Redwood process. I smiled. You'll learn. Daniel says you make everything more complicated than it needs to be. I looked at him. Daniel says a lot of things. Jason lowered his voice. Between us, I don't think you're the problem. That surprised me. What do you mean? He hesitated. Some of the decisions I've been asked to make don't make sense. Before I could respond, he walked away. That night, I stayed late. The office was almost empty. I was finishing my transition notes when an email appeared in my inbox. From Karen. Come to conference room B. Alone. I stared at it. Then I walked down the hallway. Karen was standing by the window. She looked exhausted. Sit down, she said. I didn't. Why did you send Michael those documents? Karen looked at me for several seconds. Because I was afraid. Of Daniel. She nodded. Daniel discovered last year that Redwood had offered you a direct position. I froze. What? Karen continued. They wanted to hire you. I couldn't believe it. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because Daniel rejected the idea before you ever saw it. Why? Because if you left, Redwood would probably leave too. Everything suddenly became clear. Daniel hadn't merely wanted me gone. He wanted me gone without Redwood realizing how important I was. Karen pulled a second document from her bag. This is what I found. I took it. It was an internal financial report. My eyes moved down the page, then stopped. I read the number twice. Mercer and Cole's Redwood contract was worth millions, but the document showed something I hadn't known. Almost 40% of the account's profitability depended on a specialized implementation process that I had personally developed. Daniel had never credited me for it. Instead, the company had registered it internally as a Mercer and Cole methodology. I looked up. He used my work to build the account. Karen nodded. Yes. And now he's trying to replace me. Because he thinks he can keep everything without you. I felt something inside me go quiet. Not sadness. Not anger. Clarity. What do you want me to do? Karen looked toward the conference room door. Nothing yet. I frowned. Why? Because Daniel is about to make a mistake. What kind? Karen's expression hardened. He is planning to tell Redwood that you're leaving voluntarily. I stared at her. He can't do that. He can't do that. He can say whatever he wants. Michael won't believe him. No. Karen paused. But the board might. That was the real danger. If Daniel could make it look like I had willingly abandoned the account, he could blame the resulting problems on me. And if Redwood left afterward, he could tell the board I had caused the loss. I took a slow breath. What do you need from me? Karen looked directly at me. Keep doing your job. That's it. For now. The following Monday, Jason officially took over the account. Daniel announced it during a team meeting. Emily will be transitioning out of Redwood responsibilities. He didn't say I was being fired. He didn't say my position was being eliminated. He made it sound like a normal career decision. Then he smiled. Emily has decided it's time for something new. I looked around the room. Nobody spoke. Jason looked uncomfortable. Karen stared at Daniel. And I simply nodded. That's right. Daniel's smile widened. He thought he had won. By Wednesday, the first cracks appeared. Jason called me from the Redwood office. Emily, I need help. What happened? Michael won't approve the revised implementation plan. Why? He says it doesn't match the strategy you developed. I closed my eyes. Did you explain the transition? Yes. What did he say? Jason was quiet. Then he said. He told me something I've never heard a client say before. What? He said, I don't want the company. I want Emily. I didn't answer. Jason continued. And he just canceled Friday's executive review with Daniel. My heart started beating faster. Are you sure? Yes. Then Jason lowered his voice. There's more. What? Michael requested an emergency meeting with Daniel and the board. I stared at my computer screen. When? Tomorrow morning. I knew immediately. This wasn't about the project anymore. It was about control. The next morning, I walked into the office and saw Daniel standing outside the executive conference room. He looked furious. When he saw me, his expression changed. Emily. Daniel. You need to come inside. Why? Because Redwood has made an unreasonable demand. I said nothing. He stepped closer. They want you back on the account. I almost smiled. That's unfortunate. His eyes narrowed. Don't play games with me. I'm not. You are going to tell them you made a mistake leaving. I stared at him. I never said I was leaving. His face tightened. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely afraid. Then the conference room door opened. Michael Bennett stepped out. Behind him were 3 members of the board. Michael looked at me, then at Daniel, and said, "Actually, Emily isn't the problem." He handed me a document. My hands trembled as I looked at the first page. It was an employment offer, but it wasn't from Redwood. It was from a company Daniel had been trying to acquire for nearly a year. And the offer came with a position that could change everything. I looked at Michael. "Why are you giving this to me?" He smiled. "Because I thought you should know what Daniel has been hiding." I turned the page. At the bottom was Daniel's signature, and beneath it was a clause that made my blood run cold. Daniel had personally guaranteed that if Redwood terminated its contract because of his management decisions, he would be responsible for a portion of the financial loss. But there was one problem. Redwood hadn't terminated the contract yet. Michael looked at me and quietly said, "They're waiting for you to decide what happens next." And suddenly, I understood. Daniel hadn't been trying to replace me because he thought I was worthless. He had been trying to replace me because he knew exactly how valuable I was. And now I had something he never expected. A choice. I looked at the employment offer again. The salary was higher than anything I had ever earned at Mercer & Cole. The position was senior. The company was growing. And the person who had recommended me was Michael Bennett. But none of that was what made Daniel's face turn pale. It was the final page. A transition clause gave me control over a specialized implementation framework I had spent years developing. The framework had been used to build Redwood's expansion strategy, but the documentation clearly showed that I had created the original methodology before Mercer & Cole incorporated it into its consulting system. Daniel had signed the agreement acknowledging its origin. He had simply assumed I would never read it. I looked at him. "You knew." Daniel didn't answer. "You knew how important this was." He finally spoke. "Emily, you're misunderstanding the situation." "No." My voice was calm. "For the first time, I understand it perfectly." Michael stood beside me. "The board needs to know whether you're staying with Mercer & Cole, joining us, or pursuing another opportunity." I looked at Daniel. 6 months earlier, I would have done anything to hear him say I mattered. Now I realized I didn't need his approval anymore. "I'll make my decision today." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You can't just walk away." I smiled slightly. "That's exactly what you told me I could do." He stared at me. I continued. "You said people like me were replaceable." Silence filled the room. "Now you get to find out." I left. For the next several hours, I did something Daniel never expected. I didn't negotiate. I didn't threaten him. I didn't demand an apology. I reviewed everything. Every contract. Every document. Every piece of intellectual property. Every obligation I had to Mercer & Cole. I spoke with an employment attorney to make sure I understood my rights and responsibilities. Then I made my decision. I wasn't going to destroy Mercer & Cole. I wasn't going to expose private information just to hurt Daniel. I wasn't going to become the person he had convinced everyone I was. I was simply going to leave with my reputation intact. At 3 that afternoon, I walked into Daniel's office. He was sitting behind his desk. For once, he didn't look powerful. He looked tired. "You've made your decision?" "Yes. And I'm leaving." He looked away. "Redwood." "I'm not taking the client from you." That surprised him. "I'm giving Mercer & Cole a professional transition period." He looked back at me. "Why?" "Because I built relationships here. I won't punish innocent employees for your decisions." His expression changed. For the first time, I saw something that looked almost like shame. "What do you want?" "Nothing. Everyone wants something." I wanted respect. He lowered his eyes. "And now." I stood up. "Now I want peace." 3 weeks later, I joined Michael's company. My new role wasn't simply another consulting position. I was asked to lead a new client strategy division. My first project? Building a new implementation framework from scratch, one that I owned and controlled from the beginning. Meanwhile, Mercer & Cole began experiencing problems. Not because I sabotaged them, because the systems Daniel had built around me had never been properly understood by anyone else. Jason did his best. I knew he would. But one person couldn't replace 6 years of accumulated knowledge overnight. Redwood eventually gave Mercer & Cole an ultimatum. They would continue working with them only if the company changed its leadership structure for the account. Daniel fought it. The board disagreed. Then Karen presented her documentation. She showed them how Daniel had deliberately removed me from the account. She showed them the internal staffing proposal. She showed them the financial projections. And finally, she showed them the messages proving that Daniel had planned to tell Redwood I had voluntarily left. The board called Daniel into an emergency meeting. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. 2 days later, Karen called me. "It's over." "What happened?" "Daniel resigned." I was quiet. "Did they fire him?" "No." She paused. "He resigned before they could." I felt no excitement, no satisfaction, Just relief. What about you? I'm staying. Good. Karen laughed softly. You know what's strange? What? Daniel spent years making sure nobody became indispensable. I smiled. And now? Now the board is rebuilding the entire account around the exact people he ignored. I looked out my office window. Chicago was glowing beneath the afternoon sun. For years, I had measured my worth by whether someone above me noticed it. Daniel taught me something painful. Being undervalued doesn't make you less valuable. It only means you're standing in the wrong room. 6 months later, Michael invited me to a private dinner. I expected a business conversation. Instead, he handed me a familiar-looking folder. What is this? Open it. Inside was the original proposal I had created for Redwood. The same 37 pages Daniel had once dismissed. But now there was a new cover page. It read, Carter Strategic Systems, Founder and Managing Director. I stared at Michael. You didn't. I did. You bought the rights? No. He smiled. You own them. I looked down at the document. The framework I had spent years building was finally under my own name. Not Daniel's. Not Mercer and Cole's. Mine. I thought about the conference room. The cold smile. The words that had once made me feel small. People like you are replaceable. I realized then that Daniel had been wrong about one important thing. I wasn't irreplaceable. Nobody is. That isn't the point. The point is knowing what you bring to the table, and having the courage to leave when someone refuses to see it. A year later, I returned to the same building where I had once been humiliated. Not as an employee. Not as a former employee seeking revenge. I was there because Carter Strategic Systems had just signed a major partnership with one of Mercer and Cole's former competitors. Jason was waiting in the lobby. He smiled when he saw me. Emily. Jason. How's the new company? I smiled. Busy. He laughed. Good. Then he handed me a small envelope. Karen wanted me to give you this. I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. You were never replaceable. You were simply working for people who didn't know your value. I folded the note carefully. Then I looked toward the elevators. I remembered the woman I had been a year earlier. She had walked into that building desperate to be recognized. The woman walking out now didn't need anyone's permission to know her worth. My boss had called me replaceable. His biggest client had refused to work without me. But the greatest victory wasn't watching Daniel lose his position. It wasn't getting the promotion. It wasn't even building my own company. It was realizing that I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better. A life where nobody could decide my worth for me. And as the elevator doors closed, I smiled at my reflection and thought, sometimes the most satisfying way to prove someone wrong is to stop asking them to be right about you.